If you have been looking for some new epic fantasy and you've been wondering if John Gwynne is for you, then you are in the right place, besties, because today I'm going to be talking about every book that John Gwynne has currently published so you can decide if this is an author that you would like to add to your TBR. So I have just finished reading through all of John Gwynne's published work. He does have a new book coming out very soon, which I haven't had the privilege of reading yet, but I will talk to you guys a little bit at the end of this video about what I know about that and how I feel it's possibly going to tie into the books that he has already published. So currently John Gwynne has 10 different books set in 2 different worlds. His first world has 7 books and 2 series set within it, and then he just has an extra trilogy, which is his most recent published series that is set in a completely different world. All of these series wrap up in a way where we conclude all of the main points that we've been dealing with throughout the story, but also in a place where John Gwynne could easily revisit these worlds at a different point in the timeline, which is what he did with his Banished series, which is where we are going to be starting today. So this world has 2 series set within it. The first one is the one that you probably heard the most about, which is The Faithful and the Fallen. This one is 4 books, and I'm pretty sure that these are the chunkiest books that John Gwynne has written as well. And when he first started writing, it was actually not with the intention to be published. He took some time off work to look after his daughter and spent some of his free time writing this series. His original intention was to write something for his children to enjoy, and I feel like that is very apparent with some of the themes that we have in this series that actually run through all of John Gwynne's books, which are strong themes of parenthood. We have a lot of positive role models for the younger characters throughout all of his books, and one of my favorite things about John Gwynne's books is the bonds that we see developing between some of the older figures in parental roles or mentor roles and our younger characters. The first book in this series is Malice, and this one is set in a world where there is an ancient prophecy written by giants that says that 2 avatars are going to rise, one for good, who is the bright star, and one for evil, who is the black sun, and all of the world is going to split in 2 and unite between one of these, and it's going to cause this epic war of the ages. And this book essentially follows the fulfillment of that prophecy, where we are following a very large cast of characters. It's a multi-perspective series, including the bright star and the black sun, but for a long time throughout the series we don't know who is going to fulfill the roles in that prophecy. This is a world that used to be very magical. Giants used to be a very strong presence in this world, but at the point that we're currently at in this timeline, people haven't seen a giant in centuries. They now think that they're myth and lore, and what starts as a very mundane world becomes more and more magical as you go throughout this series. The main themes of the conflict in this one are, of course, the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and dark, and we also have very strong themes of angels and demons and heaven and hell throughout this one as well. John Gwynne is a big history nut, which is something you will see in the inspirations of all of his books, but this series in particular was heavily influenced by Celtic, Gaelic, Germanic and Norse lore, as well as Paradise Lost. The series is actually my favourite of John Gwynne's. I think it's because it has a much slower pace and a much slower build than the other 2 series, which are both trilogies, and the individual installments in both of those series are a lot shorter as well. But the first book in this one is essentially just introducing us to some of the key players in this series, establishing what their life is like before conflict arises, and then as we build towards the end of the book, we have some conflict that destabilizes the world and the characters, that pushes them onto the track of the plot that we mainly deal with in the other 3 books in this series. One of the reasons why I love this particular series so much is because the characters are the ones that stuck with me and resonated with me the most. Going into this, I knew that this had a lot of character perspectives, so if you're going into this series for the first time, which is my recommended starting point for John Gwynne for the most part, then I would recommend making note of all of the different characters and where they're currently at, just until you get familiar with them, which is something that I I did and really stopped me from getting confused or overwhelmed by the amount of people that we were following in here. And so I didn't have any issue with that part of the story at all. And as somebody who does enjoy slower paced stories, this one really gave me time to bond to the characters and become accustomed to this world. The second series published by John Gwynne was actually a follow-on from The Faithful and the Fallen, set in the world of the Banished lands, and that is the Blood and Bone trilogy. This one is set 100 to 150 years after the events of The Faithful and the Fallen, and it mainly deals with the aftermath of the final conflict and the final resolution that is achieved at the end of The Faithful and the Fallen. It gives the world some time to develop, to get used to this new state that they've been forced into given the dramatic events at the end of the last series, and we're dealing with the consequences and the effects of this new world after the dust has had some time to settle. The main issue that we have in this series is that the world has fallen under a new governance. And while we had a lot of strong themes of light and dark and good and evil in The Faithful and the Fallen, this one really blurs the lines between good and evil. There are layers to the different parties that we established in the first series that are fully delved into in this one when myth becomes reality. I really enjoyed this series as a follow-on from The Faithful and the Fallen because for all intents and purposes, this is a very classic style heroic fantasy with a chosen one character. It's multi-perspective. We have magic, we have warriors, we have ancient races, and it feels very much like a very typical fantasy world and fantasy story. In here, John Gwynne introduced some horror elements, which I really loved. There is a big sense of foreboding in the first book, which is A Time of Dread, and there is a community in here that just feel really weird. It was giving me like The Hills Have Eyes vibes, where you just know, like at the beginning of a horror movie when you know that something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it. And I really loved revisiting this world that I was familiar with, but with a little bit of a different tone and through a different lens. And I also really enjoyed the themes of systemic abuse and like power imbalances and how people take advantage of those that was explored throughout this series. And I thought that that was a really interesting, compelling addition to this world and this story. One of the key differences between the Faithful and the Fallen series and the Blood and Bone trilogy is this is a much more tightly woven story with a faster pace. The writing style between the two is quite different, and John Gwynne's other series, which I'll be talking about shortly, the Bloodsworn Saga, is more similar to Of Blood and Bone than it is The Faithful and the Fallen. I do prefer a slower paced story, which is why The Faithful and the Fallen is my favorite series of all three, but I feel like this one still really worked for me because you get most of the world building in The Faithful and the Fallen. So while the political climate is a little bit different in Of Blood and Bone, and while the world is now a little bit different, you know the bones, you know the history, you know the lore that came before this series if you have read The Faithful and the Fallen. So if you are somebody who prefers slower fantasy stories like me, it's almost like all of the work has already been done in The Faithful and the Fallen, so I don't mind that this one is a little bit more compact and a little bit faster paced. Now, a question that always comes up when we're talking about multiple series set in the same world is, do I have to read The Faithful and the Fallen before I read Of Blood and Bone? I would always advocate that you do read both because of the kind of reader that I am. If I have an option, I will always start at the beginning. I'll always start at the right place in the correct quote unquote reading order. That being said, I have heard of people reading this series and enjoying it without ever having picked up The Faithful and the Fallen. So I feel like it really depends what kind of reader you are. If you like a slow build, extensive world building, if you like lingering in the slow moments with the characters like I do, then I would definitely recommend that you start with The Faithful and the Fallen. If you're somebody who likes faster paced stories, if you like your fantasy a little bit more action packed, if you would rather kind of cut to the chase and get to the point, then I think that you could read this series without having read The Faithful and the Fallen. I personally wouldn't recommend it, but I do think it is possible if that is a style of book that you prefer, because it's possible that all of the extra kind of lore and world building that you get in this one is not something that you would be as interested and enthusiastic about if you're more just interested in the plot and the themes of this one, which I do think the themes and the way they're woven through the fantasy story are a little bit more interesting in this series than this one, which, as I said, is like straight up classic fantasy style. Now, even though we do have 2 series already set in the Banished lands, John Gwynne has once again left the end of this series in a place where it could be picked up later down the line. I was very satisfied with how he wrapped up this series, tied up all of the loose ends and brought it to a finite conclusion, but there is an interview included in one of these where he says that there is a possibility of him revisiting this world, and if he did, he would pick it up in the like medieval time period, or we would see the influence of like our medieval time period in this fantastical world. Now, his other currently published trilogy is completely different, but also very similar. This is set in a completely different world, and it is a world that is heavily inspired by Norse mythology. This one is set in the world of Vigrid, which is immediately more magical than the Banished lands at the start of this series. In the known history of this world, there was an epic war between the gods. There is this legendary fabled battleground where the gods came to the end of their war and they all killed each other, and the skeletons of the gods are said to reside there. The bones of the gods are very, very valuable in this world, and that is something that we see coming up consistently throughout the course of this series. And like the Banished lands, this is a world that does become more and more magical the further that you get into it, as humans start to harness powers that maybe should not be within their control and their realm of possibility. But right at the beginning of this world, we have some of the children of the gods. They're things like forest spirits, similar to what we see in the Godswoods in Game of Thrones. There's also little like imp-like, sprite-like creatures, similar to like the domovoi in Russian folklore, like those kind of good-natured, for the most part, helpful spirits and creatures. And we're once again dealing with multiple perspectives in this one. Now, in terms of the range of perspectives that we have, The Faithful and the Fallen has a lot. We narrow that down for Of Blood and Bone, and then when we get to the Bloodsworn Saga, we just have, I think it's 3 perspectives in book 1, and like with all of the series, we do add a couple more with every book, but I don't think we get to any more than 5 throughout the course of the Bloodsworn Saga. The plot of this series is pretty difficult to describe because I feel like this is more of a continuous build. We start off following 3 characters in very different parts of the world, but as the story progresses, their stories grow together and we uncover things about them throughout the course of especially book 1 that reveals why they are connected and why they are the protagonists of this series that would be spoilers if I told you that now, because of the way the reader slowly discovers these plot points throughout the course of the books. We have a couple of things going on in the world of Vigrid at the time that we enter it. The first is that there are very powerful rulers surrounding the area that this series is set in that could potentially threaten these territories. And so some of these smaller rulers of this land are banding together, they're raiding, they're taking other communities under their umbrella to protect against these other threatening rulers that are potentially going to invade. And amongst all of this, we have children going missing, and nobody knows whether this is connected or whether it's something completely unrelated, but something sets all 3 of our main characters on a path to hunt down a missing child. The 3 core perspectives we have in here, one of which is Orca, who is somebody who used used to be a warrior. She's now settled down with her husband and her son, and her very way of life is threatened, which causes her to take up her weapons again and start to travel across this world. We also have Elvar, who is the daughter of a Jarl who has felt the need to prove herself. She doesn't want to just be the daughter of a Jarl and take all of the benefits that come with that. And so she has joined a band of warriors to try and make a name for herself. And then we also have Varg, who is a slave, a thrall, whose sister has been killed, and he is looking for a powerful witch who will perform this ritual to allow him to experience his sister's last moments of life so he can find out what happened to her and take revenge for her death. We also have people in here called the Tainted, who are humans that have some of the blood of gods, and they have some magical abilities that go with that. So all of the gods in here are inspired by Norse mythology. So you have Snaka, who is like the father of the gods. He is a big snake, and so you have people who have his powers. There are people who have some of the powers of the wolf god, and they are people who are enslaved in this world, and that forms a big part of this plot line as well. So in terms of pace and writing style, this one I would say is more in keeping with A Blood and Bone. It is much faster. We have once again a more tightly woven story. I would say that the pacing on this one feels a little bit slower in that the build into the series is a little bit slower. Like I said, you don't really know what relevance our three main perspectives have in the plot as a whole until you get to the end of book one. And as with most first books in a fantasy series, you are mainly just getting acquainted with the world and the characters and what is going on throughout that first book before things really start to accelerate in books 2 and 3. Personally, this is my least favorite of all three of the series because I do prefer that slower pace, and I feel like that is mitigated in the A Blood and Bone trilogy by the fact that there is a whole series that comes before it with that slower pace that has a slower build into the world, whereas this one is our introduction into this world. I do know though that I am in the minority a little bit there because of all of John Gwynne's series, the ones that I hear the most about is of course The Faithful and the Fallen, which was the first one, been around a long time, and also the Bloodsworn Saga. There are a lot of people who really love this series. So once again, if you're somebody who is driven more by action and prefers a faster pace, I feel like this series is one that you will love. So if you have been interested in John Gwynne and you're not really sure where you should start, I would definitely say that it depends what kind of reader you are. If you are somebody whose taste more align with mine and you love that slower pacing, then I would definitely recommend that you start with Malice before going into the Blood and Bone series. And then if you enjoy both of these, then move on to the Bloodsworn Saga. If you are somebody who enjoys more action, faster pacing, less character perspectives, more tightly woven stories with less, I'm going to put quote unquote filler because I personally love things that some people would consider filler, like travel scenes or, you know, just like camping in the woods for a chapter, then I would definitely recommend that you start with the Bloodsworn Saga. And if you really enjoy John Gwynne's writing and the common themes, which is what I'm about to go into, that do go throughout all of his series, then maybe backtrack and go into the Faithful and the Fallen and then follow up with the Blood and Bone series. If you have never read anything by John Gwynne, I don't know why you would start here. Like, I wouldn't recommend it just because I feel like there are two other starting points that make a lot more sense to me. But if you must, you could technically read this first, but it is going to spoil the end of this one. So I'd say only do that if you never intend to read this one. But for those who like the faster pacing, I would definitely recommend that you go and try this one. Give this one a try and kind of make your mind upon it that way. In terms of common themes, things that you can expect from all of John Gwynne's books, we have those very strong familial bonds, and especially parental and mentor relationships. We have multiple examples of great parental or mentor-mentee relationships within The Faithful and the Fallen, with especially a focus on father-son kind of dynamics. And something that I really appreciate about this dynamic in John Gwynne's books is that the younger characters are always taken seriously by the older characters. They are not regarded as silly because they're younger and more inexperienced. Their opinions aren't disregarded because of that, and that is something that I feel I don't see very often in fantasy. You normally have either older characters taking charge because they have more experience, or you have younger characters who don't have parents, or the parents are never seen in the stories, so that the younger characters can kind of get into trouble and make terrible decisions without the influence of those like parental figures. In this series, you also have another strong father-son relationship, as well as a whole host of mentor and mentee relationships. And in this one, the more prominent relationship is actually a maternal one between a mother and her son. Something else that John Gwynne has a special interest in is battle reenactments. I can't remember which particular era it is. It might be like Vikings, but he participates in a lot of historical battle reenactments. And I feel like that is also very evident in his books. All of these have a historical influence or a historical focus, and they all include some of the knowledge and like fight styles and weaponry that is accurate to the time period that these series have been inspired by. So if you are somebody who likes series that are kind of like battle focused, I feel like these are ones that you're really going to be able to get behind. We also have wolves playing a very prominent role in all of John Gwynne's books. There are animal companions specifically in the Faithful and the Fallen series, which also transfers over to Of Blood and Bone. And then, as you can tell, the Bloodsworn Saga also has some wolf influences as well. And we do, as I said, also have those people who have the blood of the gods, so some of the traits and powers of the gods, including our wolf god in here, who is called Ulfria. There's also a lot of strong themes of things like found family and like codes of honor and brotherhoods running through all of these books as well. So the only John Gwynne book that I haven't covered in this video so far is his upcoming release, The Wolves of War, which is released in the UK on the 3rd of November. Very sadly, I have not had the privilege of receiving one of the beautiful arcs of this book, so I have not yet read it, but I did just want to cover what I know about it from the synopsis, because I do think that it is going to be very in keeping with everything that John Gwynne has published so far, given what I know from the synopsis. This one is the first book in a duology that is inspired by Slavic mythology this time, which is very exciting because I've read series before inspired by Slavic folklore and mythology that I've really enjoyed. The page count on this one is about 500 pages, and there are only going to be 2 installments in this series. So I do think once again we are dealing with a more faster paced action driven story. So this one is of course called The Wolves of War. So we have the wolves right there in the title. I do feel like the title of this is more symbolic than it is literal, because this is dealing with clans that used to be free to worship their own gods and have their own culture, and they have been conquered by northern invaders. Our main characters are a man and his daughter, so once again we have very strong familial bonds there, as well as a very strong parental figure. And I do believe that this also serves as a tribute to John Gwynne's daughter, who passed away a few years ago now. The daughter protagonist in this series is somebody who is disabled, and she has dreams of magic and running with wolves. And this is an ability that she has to harness and hone to protect the people that she loves when 2 princes become sworn enemies and the wolves of war start to circle around the community where our main character lives. Our other protagonist, I am assuming, based on the way the synopsis is written, that this is maybe going to be dual perspective, because we also have the girl's father mentioned in there as well, who will do anything to protect the people he loves, but especially his daughter. So as I have read everything else that John Gwynne has published and enjoyed all of it, Wolves of War is definitely on my radar, and like I said, I am particularly interested in this one, given that it is inspired by Slavic history and folklore. That is probably the most interesting inspiration, like historical inspiration, of all of John Gwynne's series for me personally. So I will definitely be picking that one up at some point. If you are thinking of picking up something from John Gwynne after watching this video, my Epic Fantasy Book Club, Catch Up Book Club, specializes in reading epic fantasy series where there is more than one series set in the same world. So we've actually just finished reading John Gwynne. We started off with the Banished Lands because because that's 2 series set in one world. And then seeing as John Gwynne just had one additional trilogy, we just tacked that onto the end. So if you're reading through his books and you would like to hear our thoughts and our breakdown of all of these, I will link the entire John Gwynne live show playlist down below so that you can watch along with that as you read all of his books if that's something you're interested in. And if you are somebody who is interested in epic fantasy in general, then like I said, I do have that book club. It's been running since 2018, so I don't think it's going anywhere. And I've currently just read the first book in 4 different epic fantasy worlds to try and figure out what we're going to be pursuing next. And the announcement video for that is going to be coming very soon. So do follow along if that is something you may be interested in. But I think that concludes everything that I have to say on the topic of Mr. John Gwynne. Honestly, I can't hold all of these books. There's far too many. But if you have read John Gwynne in the past, then let me know your thoughts. Let me know what your favorite series from John Gwynne is down in the comments. If you are thinking of picking up John Gwynne, let me know where you're thinking of starting after watching this video. And if you guys would like to let me know you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, then go ahead and leave me a wolf emoji down in the comments, because that is something that is present in every single one of these books, I think. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram and my Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.